Welcome to Georgia College's Employer Education Partnership Lunch and Learn. We are so glad that you are here today. Again, we have Christopher Jackson, who is with us as a strategic communication expert. And today he is going to talk to us about modern communication. So I'm going to turn the time over to you, Christopher. Take it away.
Yes, thank you, Angela. I have a very fun presentation today that kind of encompasses the world that we're living in and how we communicate and interact with it. So let's get these slides up and dive right in. So let's get into it. So like I said, today we're going to be talking a little bit about modern communication, and this can really be how we communicate with each other through various platforms or the way that we communicate in the workplace. And a lot of the stuff I want to talk today about is how we can apply this to the workplace and be better in tune with the people around us and know what strategies are most effective within modern communication. And I always like to start with a philosophical quote that kind of dives us into what we're learning about. And today's quote that I wanted to use is, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that is taking place." And I think this is great when considering modern communication because we're more interconnected and more globalized and close to each other via technology than ever before, but yet there's still a vast amount of miscommunication in the workplace, interpersonally, or really just all around us. So I think the illusion that communication is being taken place is what we need to tackle today and kind of learn what strategies we can apply to our modern communication strategy. And with this, I wanted to talk a little bit about what is modern communication? And I think modern communication is really whatever the modern world is using to communicate. So we text consistently, we FaceTime, we use Slack in the workplace, we use Teams, maybe an email. And that kind of brings me into the first question that I want to ask or propose to the audience. What are some modern methods of communication that your company is currently employing? So I know some of us don't have a mic, so if you want to throw it in the chat or if you want to speak out, feel free. Teams and Zoom, beautiful. Both are great for strategy. I think a lot of the stuff that Zoom's group me for students, yes, that's a great one. Zoom makes it a lot easier to have these face-to-face meetings and you kind of get a little bit more to than just being able to call. You see, you can share the screen, Skype, yes, all great. I threw some pictures up of some of the ones that I see consistently and use in my day-to-day. Zoom, like we mentioned, Teams, even Facebook, communicating with stakeholders by understanding Facebook groups, what they're speaking about our company, or just learning about the general public and what's popular, what's making people think the way that they are, or formulate opinions about a brand. So I think even social media is a form of modern communication. So to get us started in thinking in the world of modern communication, I prepared a little activity to see how well versed we are in maybe modern culture and modern communication. So I have some acronyms and some emojis, and I wanted to get us to kind of guess what these mean. I'm gonna go ahead and show them so we don't spend too much time, but yes. Are any of these stick out that you didn't know? I actually learned one myself. I did not know ROFL was rolling on the floor laughing. That was one that I found out when I was researching this. And I think emojis add a new level of communication that even young people and the generations that are following mine are using that is making communication a little bit difficult. And we're going to learn a little bit later in this strategy of emojis can be very effective use of communication, but also there's a time and a place for emojis. So let's continue on a little bit. So I have a video prepared that's going to give us a little bit of the world of miscommunication and kind of how miscommunication can trickle down into modern communication.
Have you ever talked with a friend about a problem only to realize that he just doesn't seem to grasp why the issue is so important to you? Have you ever presented an idea to a group and it's met with utter confusion? Or maybe you've been in an argument when the other person suddenly accuses you of not listening to what they're saying at all. What's going on here? The answer is miscommunication. And in some form or another, we've all experienced it. It can lead to confusion, animosity, misunderstanding, or even crashing a multi-million-dollar probe into the surface of Mars. The fact is, even when face to face with another person in the very same room and speaking the same language, human communication is incredibly complex. But the good news is that a basic understanding of what happens when we communicate can help us prevent miscommunication. For decades, researchers have asked what happens when we communicate. One interpretation, called the transmission model, views communication as a message that moves directly from one person to another, similar to someone tossing a ball and walking away. But in reality, this simplistic model doesn't account for communication's complexity. Enter the transactional model, which acknowledges the many added challenges of communicating. With this model, it's more accurate to think of communication between people as a game of catch. As we communicate our message, we receive feedback from the other party. Through the transaction, we create meaning together. But from this exchange, further complications arise. It's not like the Star Trek universe, where some characters can Vulcan mind meld, fully sharing thoughts and feelings. As humans, we can't help but send and receive messages through our own subjective lenses. When communicating, one person expresses her interpretation of the message, and the person she's communicating with hears his own interpretation of that message. Our perceptual filters continually shift meanings and interpretations. Remember that game of catch? Imagine it with a lump of clay. As each person touches it, they shape it to fit their own unique perceptions based on any number of variables, like knowledge or past experience, age, race, gender, ethnicity, religion, or family background. Simultaneously, every person interprets the message they receive based on their relationship with the other person and their unique understanding of the semantics and connotations of the exact words being used. They could also be distracted by other stimuli, such as traffic or a growling stomach. Even emotion might cloud their understanding. And by adding more people into a conversation, each with their own subjectivities, the complexity of communication grows exponentially. So as the lump of clay goes back and forth from one person to another, reworked, reshaped, and always changing, it's no wonder our messages sometimes turn into a mush of miscommunication. But luckily, there are some simple practices that can help us all navigate our daily interactions for better communication. 1. Recognize that passive hearing and active listening are not the same. Engage actively with the verbal and nonverbal feedback of others and adjust your message to facilitate greater understanding. 2. Listen with your eyes and ears, as well as with your gut. Remember that communication is more than just words. 3. Take time to understand as you try to be understood. In the rush to express ourselves, it's easy to forget that communication is a two-way street. Be open to what the other person might say. And finally, 4, be aware of your personal perceptual filters. Elements of your experience, including your culture, community, and family, influence how you see the world. Say, this is how I see the problem, but how do you see it? Don't assume that your perception is the objective truth. That'll help you work towards sharing a dialogue with others to reach a common understanding together.
I just love that video because I think it really brings us into the world that we're living in. And there's a vast opportunities for miscommunication in a modern world. Like it was sharing the transactional method. When we communicate, we're having an opportunity for another person to perceive that communication in a different way. So I want to propose a question to the chat. Oh, it's playing my video again. Sorry about that. What are some factors that shape modern communication that you maybe experienced in the workplace or just have seen in the world around you? I know they shared a few in uh, the video, but what are some that affect your strategy or your communication daily?
For me, I have to think about the people that I'm overseeing
Mm.
and understand what their daily workload might be so that when I'm communicating with them, I'm very strategic about it, trying to make sure that I'm not overwhelming them, but also walking that fine line of challenging them, right, to stretch and to do more. So my communication efforts in the workforce is thinking about my staff and where they are with their workload.
That's a great example. I'll share one of mine. I think that in the workplace, intergenerational communication can also be a form of modern communication. And we see in the workforce that there's going to be a lot of people of different generations, and that's going to take opportunities to kind of shape and mold the way you communicate with one another. And that's truly a strategic skill of modern communication. So, the Harvard Business Review came up with their list of 10 digital miscommunications and how to avoid them. And I wanted to go over those because I thought that this kind of review was a great opportunity and it applied exactly to what we're talking about. Oh, yes, I'm seeing the chat now. Multitasking distractions. Exactly. Those are all great, great examples. And so the 10 digital miscommunications that the Harvard Business reviewed, they first started with add emojis, but proceed with caution, as we were talking about earlier. So emojis are great. They also boost engagement on social media, but there's also a time and place where an emoji looks professional, or it could also lead to miscommunication. Some emojis have some connotations or representations of things that might not be business appropriate. So be kind of familiar with what emojis you're using and know their meaning and connotation behind them. Realize that typos send a message. So this is something that's really important if you're emailing your boss or you're emailing a client. Realize that in communication, we're sending a message one way or another. So be prepared to have maybe your emails reviewed or have some grammar checkers to make sure that you're having the most clear message. Um, Also, this goes right into proofreading your messages. And then 4 is punctuation marks matter even more so for one word and very short sentences. So if you're responding to Slack or maybe a text message from your boss, realize that okay period might have a connotation of you're being passive aggressive or angry. So not necessarily change the way that you communicate, but consider what your communication is outwardly expressing to somebody. Use rich communication channels when you're first getting to know somebody. So maybe when you're trying to meet a client or you're trying to make a new connection with a new hire, maybe a business call would be Zoom with the cameras on. Consider what strategy would be best to get to know somebody. And then we're going straight into the default video in general when you can. So that's a great segue into always use video. I think that having a meeting with video is a lot more, you're able to see everybody's expressions, you're able to share ideas. There's a multifaceted layer of Zoom that can help us share ideas instead of a call or even texting or working through Slack. So always default to video when you can. Communicate your level of urgency in Slack. I think this is a great, I was reading over what they were saying about this. This is a great strategy because I think sometimes we think that everything's of the utmost importance when it has to do with what we need, but also we have to consider what everybody's workload is. And so maybe use words or communicate, I need this by, can I get this by end of day? And use your level of urgency in your needs in Slack. And also don't panic. So this one gives us kind of a an input into emotions when it regards communication. So if you're getting a email or you're having a communication with another employee or a customer or somebody that you're having a conversation with, if you're having intense emotions, maybe this conversation is making you anxious or very angry, or you're euphoric in nature, take a second before you respond. Don't panic, and just order your thoughts, order yourself before you send a message. Because I think a lot of times in the modern world, we're expected to be always connected or always respond immediately. But I think sometimes there's a strategic pause so you don't communicate in an ineffective way or a way that is contradictory to what you actually want to convey. And then avoid email when you need a yes. So Harvard Business Review found it to be the most effective when you needed a quick yes or you needed confirmation from somebody to go in person. And I know that's not always the case in the different ways that we work, and some might be always remote, but if possible, and if you can, seek that yes in person, because it is highly more effective and highly more likely you to get a yes in person. And likewise, don't send emails or Slack messages during off hours if it's not urgent. So this one kind of goes into respect. I know people work at different hours. In some people, in some work environments, this is necessary, and this is accepted to work after hours. And so just maybe if you do this, make sure that it's okay with your team, that you're not distracting them, and just kind of assess your work environment and see if this is professional or the best means of communication. Because we live in a modern world where we can work outside of office hours, but just kind of see if this is the culture of the work environment. And continuing on, because this is my second acronym that I bring to the class, and we're learning that I love acronyms, but I bring forth the camping model of modern communication. And to me, what this really means is modern communication is a delicate process as we're finding out. And to avoid miscommunication, we need to be very careful and very tedious. It's almost like pitching a tent or building a fire. You have to do it perfectly correct so it doesn't crumble and come down on you when you're sleeping. So the acronym for the camping model is clarity, audience, method, practicality, impact, need, and grace. So when we're communicating in the modern world, we need to have clarity. We need to be concise with what we need, and we need to state it clearly. So if you can kind of take out the fluff and kind of consider what you need and the level of urgency that you need, that's the best way of communicating. And then audience, consider who you're communicating to. Is it somebody of a younger generation? Is this somebody of a different cultural background than you? Is this somebody who might not understand the jargon or the verbiage that you're using? Consider that and then apply that to your strategy in communication. Likewise, method. What channels are you using? Is texting through Facebook Messenger the best way of getting a response? Or maybe we should go through Slack, or maybe an email is best for this scenario. So consider your method and your channels that you're using. And then practicality. So how often is communication effective? Likewise, is the way that you're communicating after hours effective? So consider that and then apply it to your communication in the workplace. And then impact. I think it's really important because sometimes we're in the workplace and we think about what's best for me in this instance, or how can I get my task done the best or the fastest way possible. But we need to consider the impact of others and how we're communicating with them. So consider when you're communicating with somebody, is this impacting them negatively? And also the interpersonal give and take of that conversation, make sure that we're being considerate and empathetic of the needs of our other coworkers and the ones that are around us. And the need, what do I need and what do the people need that I'm communicating with? So if I need something by end of day, make sure that's communicated in the message, because that could be misinterpreted. If I need cameras on for a video or for a meeting with my team, I need to put that in the description of that email so that it's known that, hey, we all need our cameras on for this meeting, so be prepared. So have some premature communication, and just express what you need out of your team. And then grace. We live in a world that is digital and modern in nature, and we're going to mess up. We're all human, correct? And grace is what we need in order to continue to communicate. We need to forgive each other and acknowledge our shortcomings and continue on as a society and have better communication. And to wrap us up, I have a few examples, and I think Angela's going to help me out a little bit, and maybe we bounce some ideas of, we have 3 scenarios, and we're going to apply these to the modern workplace. And Angela, I might let you take number 1 and see how we would kind of take these scenarios and work them out in our place of work. So example 1 is giving us there is a generational communication difference between a new hire and another new hire. She continues to email and message you after hours. How can you communicate this miscommunication?
So I want to make sure I understand it. So there are 2 new hires and they're just having a hard time communicating with each other, and it's happening after hours. Is that the scenario?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, I think there's a couple of things. One, there needs to be a standard put into place by their leadership, right? Whether or not emailing after hours is appropriate. Also, if it's communication between the 2 and there's no leadership involved in that, then they should, find the opportunity to learn how to communicate with each other. But I think when you're talking about new hires, you're going to have to take a look at who is hiring them and how they're onboarded, where they're given training about communication or the protocols in the workforce, or even professional development. If you find out later that there's some miscommunication happening, maybe there's some professional development opportunities that are given to help with better communication.
Great, thank you. All right, I'll take this one. So example 2, there's a disconnect between having cameras on in a meeting that you're hosting. How can you better communicate the needs to your staff? So if this needs to be communicated, it needs to be communicated before the meeting. So if we're having a staff marketing meeting or a communication meeting or a crisis communication meeting, and I need my staff to have the cameras on, put in the description of the Zoom or the Teams meeting, hey, this is a cameras on meeting. Can you please be prepared to be on camera and participate in active conversation? So I think that's a great way to communicate before your needs and expectations, so everybody's able to meet your expectations for communication. And then finally, the 3rd example is a coworker is confused by Zoom chat messages with slang and emojis during presentation. For example, slay, yes, queen, heart emojis, and fire emojis. How can the team communicate more effectively? I guess I should add. Angela, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I would just like to say that I might have been that person in the chat going, I don't even know what that means. So number 1, that becomes a distraction, right? So if I see that, then I might go off and Google, like, what is this emoji? So it's a distraction from the conversation. So there could be, again, I like your idea of before you go into a meeting, you set expectations. If we're going to communicate in the chat, let's keep the communication clean and precise so that all are able to understand where the conversation is going. But if it's a fun Zoom and it's supposed to be open to emojis and really enjoying the conversation, then maybe you make the environment an open and comfortable environment so somebody can say, I don't know what that is. Can somebody explain that to me? Right. So I think it depends on, it depends on the situation and what kind of Zoom meeting or Zoom conversation it's having.
I think those are great considerations. But that kind of wraps up our final scenarios. And my LinkedIn is here if you have any questions, likewise my email. So if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them, or you feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Christopher, for that opportunity to hear from you again about modern communication. Margaret, we are so glad that you were able to join us today. Next week, we will have Christopher here talking about surveying an audience. So we would love for you to come and be a part of that conversation. And I know coming up in a few weeks, Christopher is going to take us on a series of video and how we can use video to promote our businesses. So thank you again, Christopher. Thank you, Margaret, for being with us today. We appreciate everyone's support of our Employer Education Partnership Program, and we hope you have a great rest of your week.